mysteries, unique history, unanswered science, baffling true crime, cryptids, the strange and unusual can all be found here. So, come out of the rain and follow us across the creaking floor, through the secret passage, into the realm behind the bookcase.
Hey, hello everybody. Thank you for joining us back on another episode of Behind the Bookcase.
Hello, everyone.
So today we have sort of an interesting one. Basically, I just picked an article that contains thievery, deceit, murder, witchery, and a hanging.
Ooh.
Are you interested?
Of course.
All right. Well, this is the Yorkshire Witch, also known as Mary Bateman. It might seem incredible to us today that a relatively uneducated woman who was a career criminal, and uneducated woman, I have seen other reports that say that she was educated for her class at the time, and that's going to be an important sticking point.
Okay.
That you'll see why as we go through this, but I don't think she was completely uneducated, but lower class.
Okay.
So it might seem incredible to us today that a relatively uneducated woman who was a career criminal could successfully convince a large number of people that she possessed supernatural powers and healing abilities. But Mary Bateman succeeded in doing so in Leeds in the late 18th and 19th centuries. Mary was born Mary Harker around 1768 to a farmer at Assenby, some 4 miles south of Thirsk in North Yorkshire, and even as a child exhibited criminal tendencies. Bad from the get-go.
Yeah.
Like many girls of her era, she went into domestic service as a teenager, initially working for a family in Thirsk, but was soon sacked for stealing from them. So this is one of many cases of her just... In 1782, after knowing him for just 3 weeks, she married John Bateman, who was a wheelwright, but marriage did not curtail her activities, and the couple had to move regularly to avoid arrest. They had 4 children, including a son, also christened John. By 1799, Mary was living at Marsh Lane, Leeds. She started dressmaking and also took to telling fortunes, claiming to have supernatural powers, which she used to great effect. She made and sold potions that were supposed to cure various ailments and ward off evil spirits. There was still a popular belief in the power of witchcraft at this time, and Mary found she could cash in on it. It was probably far more profitable and certainly less risky than stealing, a crime for which she could easily be hanged. And I will say that might be a little foreshadowing. It is generally thought that Mary poisoned 3 people in 1803, although she was never tried nor convicted for these murders. The victims were 2 Quaker sisters who lived above the draper's shop with their mother in St. Peter's Square in Quarry Hill, Leeds. Mary sold them medicines, which were in fact poison mixtures, and having killed them, she robbed the house and shop.
I was going to ask if it was just like her mixing up stuff accidentally, but it sounds like that was premeditated.
Right. So I'm bouncing between 2 sites here. This is Capital Punishment UK and a science site called IFL Science or IFLS.
Okay.
Because there is a science component to this, interestingly enough.
Love it.
But on that site, they basically said that in this case... they alluded to the fact that she might be trying to expand, but actually try to make a potion and just really messed it up badly.
But doesn't it lend to like it was on purpose if she then went and robbed them? Or do you think that was just like, well, I did it now, I might as well take some stuff?
Might as well take the crime of convenience, of which I'm widely known for and can't stop doing, and just rob them after the fact, but it was an accident, no one ever knows. But she was never convicted for this crime or these crimes. And I'll get into that in just a second. Amazingly, there was little suspicion as to the cause of death and no inquest into them, so Mary just walked away from the crime with her bounty. Basically, what is going on here is she said that the ladies had died from the bubonic plague, and it was so prevalent at the time that literally no one questioned her on it.
Like she was trying to help them get over it or whatever, but that's what they died of. Well, I'm guessing it's probably because she's done it again or gets caught later or something, and they get back and say, maybe that's what happened to those two ladies.
The mystery deepens. Let's find out. Mary frequently used a, quote, Mrs. Moore to help her in her scams. This non-existent lady was the initial fount of all of Mary's, quote, wisdom, and was always consulted on behalf of Mary's clients. They were told that money she took from them was, of course, to go to Mrs. Moore. So maybe Mrs. Moore was a poor, elderly old lady, and the money was going to her.
Yeah, what's the motivation of saying it's going to someone else?
Right. In 1806, Mary invented a new alter ego called Mrs. Blythe to help her in her plans. Living in the Bromley area of Leeds at this time was a comfortably off but childless middle-aged couple, William and Rebecca Perigo. Rebecca was suffering from a fluttering in the breast whenever she laid down and was also having psychological problems, claimed to be haunted by a black dog and other spirits. She was told by her doctor, one Dr. Kersley, that she was under some sort of spell and he was unable to help her. At Whitsun, 1806, the Perigos were visited by their niece, who suggested obtaining help from Mary Bateman, who said she would be able to rid her aunt of the spirits that were possessing her. So you can see at this time, this is a real crossroads between, you know, the Renaissance era and just really some still believing in witchcraft. And
I wonder if she was having sleep paralysis. Like it was when she was laying down and she had like a fluttering in her heart and she was seeing ghost dogs and spirits.
It does sound like some of the symptoms of sleep paralysis, especially if you sleep on your back. You're more apt to get that type of sleep paralysis. So that might be a good guess. As a result, a meeting was arranged between the Perigos and Mary outside the Black Dog pub. I guess no pun intended.
Aptly.
Mary asked for an item of underclothing, which she would send to Mrs. Blythe in Scarsborough and would be able to help. William Perigo took a flannel petticoat to Mary, who promised to send it to Mrs. Blythe and told William to come see her the following week. This he did, and Mary showed him the letter from Mrs. Blythe. The imaginary Mrs. Blythe directed that Mary should go to the Perigos' house and sew 4 guinea notes at about £1.10, and some gold coins, which she had sent, one into each corner of Rebecca's bed, where they were able to be left for 18 months. William was to give Mary 4 guinea notes in exchange to return to Mrs. Blythe. The notes were duly sewn into the bed, and William was instructed to visit Mary regularly to receive further instructions from Mrs. Blythe. The next instruction was that William should nail 2 horseshoes to the door. William was soon to receive a letter from Mrs. Blythe instructing him to take Mary a further 2 guinea notes and to purchase a cheese to be sent to her by Mary.
Okay.
So
I wouldn't mind payment by cheese.
Payment by cheese. Well, there's a little more to it coming up. The letter was to be burnt after it had been read. The next letter requested a small quantity of china and silverware to be sent to her, together with some tea and sugar. Again, the letter was to be burnt. The evidence discarded. A further request for a bed and bedclothes, as Mrs. Blythe was unable to sleep on her own due to a battle she was having with the spirits that had taken over Rebecca.
Okay.
Again, the letter was to be immediately burnt after it had been actioned. The next letter predicted an illness in the Perigo's house affecting one or both of them. So you can see right now she has her hooks into them, that she's doing this kind of process. And some of it is a little ridiculous, seemingly, but there's china, there's some money, there's food and beverages, a bed, all kind of going one way here. And now, she's predicted that something's going to happen to one or both of them if they don't now do these next things. So, a really accomplished scam artist.
Yeah.
Also, the Perigos, say what you will about them there, but I do think that witchcraft and local lore and things like that were prevalent at the time, so they weren't probably any more or less naive or susceptible than gullible of anyone else in that class at the time.
And if you think about it, they weren't giving like super expensive stuff. I don't know about the bed or not, but it doesn't, it's a little thing here and a little there, but it's adding all up.
I'm curious if any of these have any significance or meaning. This doesn't go into that, but it almost seems like the kind of thing where, like, if tea and sugar is ordered, it means X. If cheese, it's Y. So therefore, it's going to be, this is the spirit that is ailing you because, like reading chicken bones or anything else, or tarot cards, there's a pattern and the pattern is meaningful. Maybe there's some kind of meaning in the items or the ingredients that I don't know.
Yeah, like in some cultures, they put particular things on the graves of people's graves, or their loved ones' favorite things, or stuff like that. But I know in certain religions, or even maybe voodoo is what I'm thinking of, where they have to put particular offerings to kind of the nasty spirits, like cigar. They have to blow cigar smoke and put candies down for this one and something else for that, rum for that one, or maybe it's the same for all of them. But I'll have to look into that. But you know what I'm saying? I think you're onto something. Like maybe she was trying to represent something with each of the item requests, but
right,
or just trying to fill her own kitchen,
right?
House.
I do like that Earl Grey you have over there on the shelf. You mind sending that to Mrs. Blythe?
She needs a teapot and a teacup too.
Right. Maybe that cast iron over there in the corner.
Yeah. All right. So what else did what else did she request?
So the next one's going to make sense, despite the cheese and the tea and sugar and other things. Rebecca went to see Mary, who did as the letter instructed, and she left with some honey and packets of powder. So this was in the next round. On the 5th of May, another letter arrived instructing the Perigos to begin eating the puddings made out of that on the 11th of May.
So here comes their illness.
Correct. Interestingly or obviously, I would, for another interjection, let's say obviously, it said that only sufficient pudding was to be made for each day. No one else was to be allowed to eat any of it, and that if there was any left over, it must be immediately destroyed. It also said that should William or Rebecca become ill, they were not to get a doctor because he would be unable to help. Now, there is that doctor that did say he couldn't help them, but we don't know why. But she definitely used that knowledge nugget later and brought that back up here.
Yeah.
So lending a little legitimacy to, this is why I'm telling you not to do this. Don't you know the doctor can't help? So, of course, don't go see the doctor.
Yeah.
So she was a pretty brilliant, for a con artist, let's say.
Yeah.
She knew how to play and read people. Definitely. Unsurprisingly, this letter, like its predecessors, was to be burnt. Okay. So the scene for the final act was now all set. The Perigos would poison themselves and kindly destroy all of the evidence of Mary's involvement. To begin with, eating the puddings produced no ill effects, but on the 6th day, they tasted different and caused William and Rebecca to have severe stomach cramps and vomiting. As directed, a doctor was not consulted, and Rebecca, who continued to eat the honey, died on the 24th of May, 1807. So think about this. They started on the 11th. They ate this stuff for, what was that, 13 days straight? And somehow, again, this is why in the beginning, I said she was not, some articles said she was educated for her class, for her family.
Right.
So this and another angle I'm going to get into in just a little bit kind of tells you why. She knew not to do this all in one fell swoop. She knew to do this over time.
Yeah.
Somehow. So she had some experience, and who knows, with her running around being Little Miss, 5-finger discount, when she was growing up, maybe she was also that kid that poisoned the neighbor's chickens and the cats in the yard and just kind of knew.
Experimenting or something.
So I don't know how she figured all this out, but she did. William, however, did consult a doctor who suspected that Rebecca could have been poisoned, but no post-mortem was carried out. So again, I know this is an old, ancient case, but it's still one of those cases where just basic due diligence led to her getting away with this for a lot longer than she should have in a lot of these cases.
I wonder if people had to pay for autopsies back then or something. That would
might have been
keep them from doing it.
Or if someone from the commoner class died of whatever and bubonic plague is going around. How deep are we going to look into this? And it's not like, William was a doctor or anything like that.
And he had burnt all the evidence. So.
And he had burnt all the evidence. So what are you going to do anyway? William began to slowly recover somewhat as he was no longer eating the puddings. Mary had been very clever all this time to cover this up. Through Mrs. Blythe, she continued to demand items of value from the Perigos, but not more than she assessed that they could afford in view of William's successful business. So he was a successful businessman, but she knew not to push too far, is what it sounds like. Her real problem, though, was that William had lived rather than died as planned.
But he was still, why was he still doing anything with her?
Well, let's read on. William decided at length to examine the little silk purses that contained the guinea notes and gold coins that Mrs. Blythe had asked to have them sewn up into Rebecca's bedclothes. Surely they should still contain the notes and coins that had been placed in them. Instead, they contained cabbage leaves and copper coins.
Yeah, I could have told you that one.
Right? So literally all evidence is gone, especially the money. Now it seems that the penny had finally dropped with William. Again, no pun intended, I guess. He arranged a meeting with Mary on the pretext of buying another bottle of medicine and took an assistant with him in the form of Constable Driffield. So, sounds like he took a cop. Within this time. Mary had brought with her a bottle of liquid containing oatmeal and arsenic, with which she presumably hoped to silence her principal accuser once and for all. As soon as she saw the constable, she tried to make out that it was William Perigo who had bought the bottle for her. He was not impressed by this charade. Mary was now taken into custody, and when the constable searched her house, he was able to recover many of the things that had been sent to Mrs. Blythe by the Perigos. She appeared before the magistrates and the following day charged with Rebecca's murder. They committed her for trial at the Yorkshire Lent Assizes of 1809, which opened at York Castle on Friday, the 17th of March, before Judge Sir Simon LeBlanc. And let me just say that that would be a great name. I'm pretty sure that's a member of Duran Duran. Evidence of the handwriting on Mrs. Blythe's letters being identical to Mary's was given, and how Mary had sent the letters to Scarborough and had them mailed back so that they would bear the correct postmark. A thorough search by constables in Scarborough had revealed predictably that there was no Mrs. Blythe, of course. Forensic evidence was provided by a Mr. Chorley, and who had analyzed the remains of the honey and found that it contained mercuric chloride, which was extremely poisonous, and this was consistent with the symptoms displayed by the Perigos. Mary's defense was straightforward denial of any involvement with the death.
Might as well just deny it.
Just deny it. Didn't do it. Sir Simon LeBlanc, who was hungry like the wolf, summed up and told the jury that to bring in a guilty verdict, they had to satisfy themselves on 3 points. These were that Rebecca had died from the poisoning, that the poison had been administered with the knowledge and contrivance of Mary, and that it had been done in the expectation of causing Rebecca's death. So pretty straightforward. Mm-hmm. He went on to remind them that although there was a strong case against Mary for having systematically defrauded the Perigos, this did not make her automatically guilty of murder. Mm-hmm. So it sounds like Simon LeBlanc had his head on his shoulders and at least was a good judge at that time.
Not 100% swaying them from making the decision.
Correct. So this wasn't a she's a witch burner trial. The evidence of criminality and murder was so overwhelming that it did not take the jury long to deliver its verdict. In accordance with the usual procedure, Mary was asked if she had anything to say as to why a sentence of death should not be pronounced on her. Breaking into floods of tears, she pleaded her belly, and other words, claimed to be pregnant. As a result, the judge ordered the doors to be locked and immediately impaneled a jury of matrons to examine her. They found her not to be pregnant, and so he proceeded to sentence her to be hanged and afterwards dissected on the following Monday. She was aged 41 at this time and had an infant child with her in the prison until the time she was condemned.
Why? So they condemned her to be dissected? Interesting.
And yeah, I'll show you something in just a second that's pretty interesting. Over the weekend, Mary wrote a letter to her husband in which she enclosed her wedding ring and asked him to give it to their daughter. She admitted some of her crimes, but continued to deny the murders. It was reported by the Leeds Intelligencer newspaper that she continued her criminal habits even in the condemned cell, telling a fortune to one of the female attendants for a guinea. On the morning of execution, she was up at 5 o'clock for a communion service in the chapel. Mary was executed on Monday, the 20th of March, 1809, by William Mutton Curry. Want to talk about a name?
Mm-hmm. That's a good executioner name.
Mutton Curry. I mean, it just sounds like
it's a
the
dish.
Nastiest dish you could imagine.
You and mutton curry.
So William Mutton Curry was the Yorkshire hangman, alongside Joseph Brown, who had been convicted of the murder of Elizabeth Fletcher. So she was hanged with another person, another murderer. Curry was nicknamed Mutton as he had twice been convicted of sheep stealing and reprieved on both occasions, the last on the condition that he remain prisoner in the castle and carry out the executions there, which he did from 1802 to 1835.
Yeah, that's wild.
So you wonder who is the executioner, you know, the fat guy with the axe behind those masks or whatever. So he was actually a prisoner, but because he had a job, he was basically free within the walls of the prison. He just had to do the executions.
Wow.
So in this case, throw the lever. The new drop gallows was set up in an area behind the castle, and some 5,000 people came to watch Mary die. Despite the best efforts of the chaplain, the Reverend George Brown, Mary persisted in her denial of the murders and her other criminal activities to the very end, dying, as one report put it, with a lie on her lips. It seems, though, that many still believe she had supernatural powers, and there was some sympathy for her. It was reported that some of the spectators really thought that she would be saved from death by some divine intervention at the last moment. But this was not to be.
So she definitely had people around that thought that she had powers, and that's why she was able to get jobs like that in the first place.
Right. So there was still this widespread belief in the practice of what she was doing at the time, even up to the very end. So after execution, Mary's body was sent to the Leeds Royal Infirmary for dissection and afterwards put on display. Again, I don't know why this judge basically ruled that she be dissected.
And then put on display.
Right.
For who?
The public did, however, pay 3 pence each to view her body, and £30 was raised for the hospital. So they dissected her body and basically made it a sideshow to raise money for the hospital.
Was that like a normal thing they did? I've never heard of that.
Unclear.
Did the science site that you were looking at have that?
Well, let's take a look at that in just a moment. Okay. So strips of Mary's skin were sold as curios.
Oh my God.
Yeah, they really made this oddities freak shop, but raised £30 for the hospital at the end of the day. Her skeleton was used initially for anatomy classes, and afterwards, together with a plaster death mask cast of her skull, put on display. It can still be seen in the Thackeray Museum in Leeds, to whom it was loaned by the infirmary. And I will put the photo up for everybody, and I'm about to show it to Erin.
Ew.
So you can see it's missing legs. The right arm is disconnected from the rest of the skeleton, and it almost looks like a very creepy art display.
Yeah, the bottom jaw is missing too.
Yeah, it really looks like intentionally creepy.
Yeah. I mean, that may have just been how they decided to display it, you know, to get more, I don't know, make it more jarring, not jawing.
Mary was always stealing from and defrauding people and was well known as a thief. So why wasn't she informed on by the people of Leeds? It's probable that they feared her witchcraft more than her predations. So again, you know, why did people fall for this? Why was people at the very end still saying she might be saved? It was more common that the witchcraft was true versus her predations. Well, this didn't happen to me. Mm-hmm. So basically, the people of Leeds just let it slide for a long time.
Gotcha.
So now let's jump over to the science site, because this will give you a little insight into like how crafty she was for the time. Alongside her propensity for stealing, Mary Bateman also had a more spiritual side hustle as a wise woman, telling fortunes and supposedly removing harmful spells placed on her clients. So if somebody had a malady, they would come to her and she would have a spell for it, very much almost.
It sounds like the people that were coming to her already believed that they had a spell on them that was causing whatever it was. So it's like right then and there, you know that they're susceptible to the belief that if they had something bad, you know, on them already, that she could help them take it off.
Right. Kind of like in voodoo, it works because you believe in it. And I think what every good fortune teller and soothsayer and seer knows is, A, you step through my front door.
Yeah, like they came to her
Therefore, correct.
Believing already.
Right. So that's already in the bag.
Yeah.
Like many of the people at the time, Bateman kept chickens to keep her supplied with fresh eggs. However, in 1806, she claimed that one of her hens was laying magically inscribed eggs with a message: Christ is coming. Presumably, the message was meant to say Christ is coming, but of course, spell check didn't exist in 1806. Mm-hmm. And again, she was slightly educated for her class, but still was kind of not writing words correctly all the time. Mm-hmm. This revelation had exactly the reaction Bateman wanted. Huge numbers of people lined up, each paying a penny, to view the mystical and magical chicken-laying eggs.
Well, chickens don't know how to spell either, Brian.
That is correct. So maybe it was the chicken that was misspelling. Mm-hmm. Those who witnessed this were whipped into a frenzy, convinced that the apocalypse was upon them. Mary also began selling seals, assuring admission into heaven. After the chicken foretold apocalypse, these seals were just pieces of paper with the letters JC on them. So if this were a little more modern time, she would have probably been the person with the toaster that made the grilled cheeses.
Well, there was that couple not too long ago, like, I don't know, probably 20 years ago now, but there was a couple that was selling tickets to heaven and people bought them for hundreds of dollars.
And that's not a new thing. Back in the Middle Ages, the church itself sold indulgences, which were basically, we'll forgive all your sins and you can get into heaven with this piece of paper, hand over your money.
Mm-hmm.
So an indulgence was the same thing.
Yeah.
So it's not without precedent. However, not everyone believed the story of the magical apocalyptic eggs. Some skeptics got up early one morning, hiding out near Mary Bateman's house to observe her. Some gentlemen, hearing of the matter, went one fine morning and caught the poor hen in the act of laying one of her miraculous eggs. They soon ascertained beyond doubt that an egg had been inscribed with some corrosive ink and cruelly forced back up again into the bird's body. So what was this corrosive ink? It was concentrated vinegar. Vinegar is a solution of acetic acid, usually containing between 4 to 8% acetic acid. Eggshells are mostly made of calcium carbonate, also a common ingredient in antacids. Limestone is also mostly made up of calcium carbonate and is known to be dissolved by acid rain. So she knew enough chemistry to know that vinegar would basically burn messages into the calcium carbonate. Now, didn't probably know, what to call it, but knew that that worked. So she was literally painting these eggs with messages, basically going over them in several layers several times to make sure they were, quote unquote, sufficiently burned in before ramming the eggs. I mean, I feel sorry for the bird, but shoving the eggs back up into the bird just so that it could lay the egg again.
Poor bird.
So this was the level of her scamming.
Yeah.
Very.
I mean, it's pretty sophisticated.
Yeah. Very. Yeah. Devishly ingenious.
Yeah.
But cruel.
Yeah.
But still, And between the vinegar trick and, knowing how much poison when to give somebody, she had to have practiced this or studied this. But if you think about the true, they call her the Witch of Yorkshire, I think that's probably still a true label that you can ascribe to her. Was she really a witch in the classical sense, an instrument of Satan working for his return to earth? And no, but was she criminally insane or just a genius con artist who that's the only way she knew how to survive? But then she did marry somebody that had a decent income. She had a chance to have a real life and not be a criminal. She just couldn't.
Yeah.
So there was something about her like that. And to me, it reminds me of the mind of a serial killer or something like that. It's somebody that can't not do what they're doing.
Yeah.
And she had whatever that is.
It didn't necessarily have remorse for it,
Correct. Denying it up to the very end, saying that she did nothing wrong.
Mm-hmm.
It's all a bunch of lies.
Yeah. It's very much like a psychopath.
Yeah.
Not having the emotions and reactions that you would expect. And I mean, even obviously she's still doing this with her, with her own children around and things like that. So she's not taking them into, under concern.
So the science article further, you were sort of taken aback a little bit when I was saying her skin was sold as curios. The science article basically asserts that they were sold as charms. So even in her death, with that dissection after her hanging, they were selling pieces of her as a quote unquote charm.
So they were still playing off the fact that she might be
right,
like supernatural or whatever. Even the corpse. That's crazy.
I think one thing that's just sort of ironic is that, for who she was and the life that she lived and what she did to people, now for her to be displayed like that as the skeleton and pieces of her being hawked and sold away, she's now being displayed as she was, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. You're seeing the sort of the skeleton that looks creepy as all hell, missing the jaw and no legs, and the way it's displayed, it looks like it's being tortured and looks like a horror show display. That's her.
Yeah, it's fitting.
It is fitting. That's a good, that's the word I'm looking for. It's very fitting.
Yeah.
That you're now seeing like who she actually is. And it is interesting, though, a little bit of charity. There was some money raised for a hospital, and her skeleton was used in anatomy classes. So maybe some doctors learned some things using her skeleton. So that's interesting. But that is the Witch of Yorkshire.
I'd be interested to know if that was a common practice, though. I'm really curious now. If anybody out there knows any more of this, or if you've heard any stories, please leave us a comment, because I am fascinated by that. I can't believe I've never heard of that before, but I'd love to know if that, was a common practice. So please comment below. And also, if you don't mind, please like our video, share, lots of comments, and subscribe if you would. We'd really appreciate the support, and we are so glad that you joined us today.
Thank you, everybody.